I've seen so many videos where the presenter shows a sleek, shiny plasma cutter on a glossy Amazon page, then cuts a piece of metal only to end up with a weak, uneven edge that looks like a child's scribble. It's a gut-punching feeling when you spend money on a tool that looks promising online, set it up in your garage, and discover it can't hold a steady arc or it sputters every time you change the thickness of the metal. That hesitation wondering whether you'll get a machine that actually cuts, or just another piece of dust collector-friendly hardware keeps a lot of hobbyists and small shop owners scrolling without buying. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. In today's review I'm going to walk through the CUT50 air plasma cutter the way a real user would, unboxing, setting up, the first cut, and the day-to-day grind, so you can decide if it belongs in your toolbox or if you should keep looking. First off, let's talk about what a plasma cutter is supposed to do for you. In the metalworking world, a cutter is the bridge between a piece of raw steel and a finished component. You want an arc that starts instantly, stays consistent, and can be adjusted on the fly when you move from a 12-gauge pipe to a 3mm sheet. The CUT50 promises high-frequency inverter technology, which basically means the power supply is lighter and can ramp up faster than a traditional transformer-based unit. In practice, that translates to a not-ouch start, no need to hit a trigger and wait for a spark to appear. When I first plugged it in on a 110-volt circuit in my shop, the arc ignited within a second, and the cutter stayed on without the humming I've heard from cheaper units that need a few seconds to warm up. That instant start saved me time on a project where I was cutting multiple lengths of 1mm sheet for a custom enclosure. I could just walk the torch along the cut line, and the arc followed like a well-trained dog. Dual voltage compatibility is a claim that sounds nice on paper but can be a real game-changer in a cramped garage. Many of us have a standard 110V outlet near the workbench, but when you start tackling thicker material, say 10mm mild steel for a small structural brace, you quickly run into the limits of a 110V system. The CUT50 lets you switch to 220V without swapping any hardware. You just flip a selector switch and the machine steps up its output. I tested that switch on a 2-hour afternoon project, cutting both 3mm and 8mm plates. The transition was seamless, and the cutter kept a clean kerf on the thicker plate, which is something many entry-level units struggle with. That flexibility means you don't need to buy a second machine or a separate transformer for heavier jobs. Now, let's get into the everyday ergonomics that often get glossed over in spec sheets. The unit is surprisingly compact, about the size of a small suitcase, and the weight is under 20 pounds, so you can slip it onto a rolling toolbox and carry it around a job site. The controls are laid out on a single rotary knob for amperage, plus a simple on-off switch and the dual voltage toggle. There's no need to wrestle with a complicated menu system. You set the amperage, flip the power, and you're ready to cut. For a hobbyist who only cuts a few pieces a week, that simplicity reduces the learning curve dramatically. When I used it for a weekend project fabricating a decorative metal sign, I spent less than 5 minutes adjusting the machine before the first cut. Versatility is another point the manufacturer pushes. The cutter is advertised as suitable for steel, stainless, aluminum, and even copper, provided you have the right consumables. In my experience, the CUT50 performed admirably on mild steel and stainless steel up to about 6mm. The cut edge was smooth, and the dross, the little slag that sticks to the bottom of the cut, was minimal, which saved me a lot of grinding later. However, when I tried it on 8mm aluminum, the arc sputtered and the cut width widened noticeably, making it harder to achieve the clean edge I need for a decorative panel. That's not a deal breaker, but it's a reminder that the machine shines brightest on ferrous metals and may need more finesse or a dedicated aluminum nozzle when you move into non-ferrous territory. Let's talk about the hidden trade-offs. The CUT50's duty cycle, a measure of how long you can run it before it needs to cool, sits around 40% at its maximum 50 setting. In other words, you can run it for roughly 4 minutes of cutting before you need to give it a minute or two to cool down. For a quick repair job or a low-volume hobby project, that's fine. For a production environment where you're cutting dozens of pieces per hour, it becomes a bottleneck. I found myself planning my workflow around that limitation, cutting a batch of parts, then pausing while the unit cooled, then moving on to the next batch. If you're